If it's always someone else's fault, you're not growing. Many people go through life trapped in a cycle of blame, constantly pointing outward for every difficulty, every mistake, every disappointment they face, thinking that by assigning fault to others they can protect themselves from discomfort, responsibility, or even the fear of failure. It feels safe to do this at first, to find a target for frustration or anger, to say, if only they had done this differently, my life would be easier, or I wouldn't have failed if someone else had behaved better. But this habit, while comforting in the moment, quietly erodes personal growth and keeps you locked in a pattern of dependency on external circumstances, giving others control over your emotional state and your sense of self-worth. Growth, real growth, does not come from blaming people or circumstances. It comes from taking full ownership of your experiences, your reactions, and your mindset, and learning to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. When you stop reacting automatically, you create a pause, a powerful space between stimulus and response, where you can choose how to act, how to think, and how to feel. Positive self-talk becomes the cornerstone of this practice, a deliberate habit of speaking to yourself in ways that remind you of your inner strength and capability, even in the most challenging moments. Instead of saying, "They made me angry," or "I can't believe this happened because of them," try replacing it with, "I have the ability to stay calm. I can control my response, even if I can't control what happened." Or, "I am stronger than my circumstances. I choose to grow from this moment." At first, this may feel unnatural because human instinct often pushes us to react immediately, defensively, and emotionally, but with repeated practice, this shift in internal dialogue rewires the mind, allowing you to approach life with greater clarity, composure, and resilience. Blame is seductive because it offers a sense of relief. It temporarily lifts the weight of responsibility. But it comes at the cost of power, because every time you assign fault to someone else, you surrender control of your feelings and your growth to external forces. Every criticism, slight, or perceived injustice that you allow to dictate your emotional state strengthens the very habits that keep you stuck, frustrated, and dependent on what others do or fail to do. On the other hand, choosing not to react immediately, choosing to breathe and affirm, "I am in control, I choose my response," places the locus of control firmly in your hands. It shifts the focus from external chaos to internal mastery, transforming life from something that happens to you into something you actively navigate. When setbacks occur, rather than pointing fingers or replaying scenarios of blame in your mind, you can train yourself to see them as opportunities to learn, to adapt, and to grow. Ask yourself, what can I take from this experience? How can I respond differently next time? What lesson is here for me? By framing challenges in this way, you create a mindset of ownership rather than victimhood. Positive self-talk is essential in this process because it reinforces the belief that you have agency over your emotions and reactions, even in situations that feel uncontrollable. Statements like, "I am learning," "I am growing," "I am capable of handling this," or "I remain calm and intentional no matter the circumstances," become mental anchors, steadying you when storms arise. Emotional mastery is not about suppressing feelings or pretending nothing affects you. It is about acknowledging emotions fully while choosing to respond consciously instead of reacting automatically. You may notice that the world still contains people who act unfairly, situations that seem unjust, and events that disrupt your plans, and that is unavoidable. But what is within your power is how you meet these realities, whether with panic, frustration, and blame, or with calm, focus, and self-directed growth. Each time you choose the latter, you reinforce a new habit, a habit of not letting external factors dictate your inner peace. Growth, then, is measured not by the absence of challenges or conflicts, but by the ability to remain centered, intentional, and mindful in the face of them. This means taking a deep look at the moments when your first instinct is to assign fault and asking yourself why you feel the need to react this way and how you can transform that energy into something productive. The practice of pausing, breathing, and speaking to yourself with positivity is the daily exercise that builds this capacity over time. It might feel small in the moment, almost inconsequential, yet repeated consistently, it produces profound change. Over weeks and months, you notice that you no longer feel the urgent need to lash out when criticized, the need to vent when frustrated, or the need to replay negative events in your mind. Instead, you approach situations with measured responses, understanding that your calm and deliberate reactions carry far more weight than reactive anger or defensiveness. You begin to realize that when you stop blaming others, you reclaim the narrative of your life. You begin to own your choices, your reactions, and ultimately your growth. Each time you resist the urge to react, affirming, "I control my response. I am calm. I am learning." You strengthen your ability to respond intentionally in future moments. And as you develop this practice, you notice a shift not just internally but externally. Relationships improve because you are no longer reacting emotionally to slights or misunderstandings. Work and projects move forward with less conflict because you maintain clarity in stressful situations. And most importantly, you feel a profound sense of inner freedom because you are no longer tethered to the unpredictable behavior of others. The power of not reacting, combined with positive self-talk, is transformative. It is a conscious declaration that no one else can steal your peace or dictate your growth. Your mind becomes your ally, your words to yourself become your guidance system, and your actions become a reflection of deliberate choice rather than automatic reaction. This is the essence of taking responsibility, of owning your life fully. When you recognize that blaming others is a symptom of avoiding responsibility and you replace that habit with the discipline of self-reflection, mindful pause, and positive affirmation, you unlock the potential to grow emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Life will continue to present challenges, people will continue to act in ways that frustrate or disappoint you, and circumstances will continue to test your patience. But with practice, you can meet these moments with calm, dignity, and self-mastery. You can remind yourself, "I am capable, I am resilient, I am growing. No one controls my peace except me." And in that simple, daily act of choice, choosing not to react, choosing to speak kindly to yourself, choosing to take ownership, you lay the foundation for profound personal transformation. You move from a life of blame and reaction to a life of responsibility, growth, and empowerment, proving that true strength does not lie in controlling others or external events, but in mastering your own mind, emotions, and responses. In every challenge, in every perceived slight, and in every frustrating moment lies an opportunity to practice this mastery. The moment you stop blaming, the moment you pause and speak to yourself with positivity, you step fully into your own power, creating a life defined not by circumstances, but by conscious choice, resilience, and growth. Emotions are not your enemies, but uncontrolled reactions can be, and understanding this distinction is crucial for anyone seeking true personal growth and emotional mastery, because so often people confuse feeling anger, frustration, sadness, or disappointment with the idea that these emotions must dictate their actions, when in fact they are natural signals that require acknowledgement and thoughtful management rather than impulsive expression. From a young age, many of us are conditioned to react immediately to emotions, whether through shouting, withdrawing, complaining, or lashing out in subtle ways, and over time these automatic reactions become habits that shape our relationships, our self-image, and our ability to navigate life's challenges. Yet the truth is that the power lies not in suppressing emotions or pretending they don't exist, but in learning to recognize them, to name them, to understand why they arise, and then to decide consciously how to respond rather than reacting instinctively. Imagine the difference between someone who experiences anger and immediately lashes out at a colleague, friend, or loved one, versus someone who feels the same anger but takes a deep breath, acknowledges the feeling, and tells themselves, "I feel this, but I am not controlled by it. I can respond with clarity and wisdom." The latter is practicing the essential skill of emotional self-mastery, which is the cornerstone of personal growth, resilience, and effective communication, because life will always present situations that trigger strong emotions, and the difference between a life dominated by chaos and a life guided by intentionality is how one responds in those moments. Positive self-talk is a critical tool in this process, because the mind tends to follow the narratives we tell ourselves, and if your inner dialogue reinforces impulsive reactions, "I can't take this, this is unfair, I hate this," then your actions will mirror that chaos. But if you train your mind to repeat affirmations such as, "I am calm, I am capable, I can handle this situation wisely," then your emotional responses will begin to align with intention, not instinct. Developing this skill requires patience and practice, because the first instinct, when triggered, is often to respond quickly, defensively, or emotionally, and the habit of immediate reaction is deeply embedded in our nervous system. Yet each time you pause, take a breath, and consciously remind yourself that your emotions are signals, not commands, you strengthen a mental pathway that allows you to respond thoughtfully in future situations. This does not mean denying or repressing emotions. It means acknowledging them fully, while understanding that acknowledging is not the same as obeying, and this subtle distinction is what separates emotional intelligence from reactive behavior. Consider, for instance, a scenario where someone criticizes your work unfairly or behaves rudely in a public setting. The first wave of emotion might be shock, anger, or embarrassment, and the impulse might be to argue, defend yourself, or retaliate. But the moment you recognize, "This is my emotional response, but I can choose how to act," you gain control of the situation in a way that protects both your dignity and your inner peace. Positive self-talk during such moments might be, "I can handle this calmly. Their behavior does not dictate my emotions. I choose to respond with composure." And this deliberate repetition trains the mind to see every challenge as an opportunity to practice self-mastery. Emotional self-control also allows you to avoid unnecessary escalation in relationships and professional settings, because reactive behavior often intensifies conflicts and damages trust, while measured responses foster understanding, empathy, and effective problem-solving. Furthermore, mastering your emotions has a compounding effect. The more you practice responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively, the easier it becomes to remain centered during increasingly stressful or provocative situations. And over time, this skill becomes second nature, transforming not only your emotional landscape, but your overall life experience. The key is to understand that emotions themselves are neutral. They are information, alerts, and signals about your environment, your boundaries, and your needs. But it is the reaction to emotions that either empowers you or limits you. When you learn to see emotions as guides rather than dictators, you open the door to self-awareness, growth, and greater emotional intelligence, and this shift profoundly changes the way you perceive challenges, setbacks, and interpersonal dynamics. For example, instead of reacting with defensiveness when criticized, you might pause and say, "I feel defensive, but I can respond constructively. I will use this feedback to grow." Instead of reacting with anger to a rude driver, you might silently affirm, "Their behavior is not mine to control. I remain calm and focused." This conscious pause, combined with positive self-talk, interrupts the habitual cycle of emotional reactivity and replaces it with intentional action that reflects your values and goals rather than automatic impulses. Additionally, controlling your reactions builds resilience, because it allows you to face adversity without losing composure or succumbing to negative spirals of thought, which often exacerbate the problem rather than solve it. Each time you successfully navigate a situation without reacting impulsively, you reinforce your capacity to handle future challenges, creating a feedback loop of confidence, self-efficacy, and emotional stability. It is also important to recognize that mastering emotional reactions is not a solitary pursuit. It improves relationships, communication, and collaboration because people respond positively to calm, thoughtful engagement rather than volatile, unpredictable responses. When you choose to respond rather than react, you demonstrate integrity, maturity, and reliability, qualities that others intuitively respect and trust. Furthermore, this practice strengthens your internal narrative, reinforcing the belief that you are in control of your life, regardless of external circumstances, and this sense of agency is critical for personal empowerment. Consider that life will inevitably present moments of injustice, frustration, and challenge, and the temptation to react immediately and emotionally will always be present. Yet the power lies in the conscious decision to acknowledge emotions, reflect, and then respond deliberately. Each time you do so, you strengthen your emotional intelligence, resilience, and self-control, creating a foundation for sustained personal and professional growth. Over time, this practice transforms your entire approach to life. You become someone who navigates challenges with clarity rather than confusion, who faces adversity with composure rather than panic, and who experiences emotions fully without letting them dictate your destiny. The ability to remain calm in the face of provocation, to respond thoughtfully rather than react instinctively, and to reinforce this behavior through positive self-talk is a skill that sets apart those who grow and thrive from those who remain stuck in cycles of frustration, blame, and reactive behavior. Ultimately, learning to control your emotional reactions is not about denying your humanity, but about embracing it fully while asserting mastery over how it manifests externally. By practicing awareness, pausing before reacting, and consciously guiding your internal dialogue, you reclaim the power over your life that reactive behavior surrenders, and you step into a version of yourself that is calm, resilient, and capable of handling any situation with grace, wisdom, and intentionality, because the truth is that emotions will always exist, challenges will always arise, and people will always act unpredictably, but the one constant you can rely on is your ability to respond thoughtfully, grounded in self-awareness, self-control, and positive self-talk. And in this mastery lies the freedom, growth, and inner peace that define a truly empowered life. Every reaction is a choice, and understanding this fundamental truth is essential to mastering your emotions and achieving personal growth, because life will inevitably present countless situations that provoke feelings of frustration, anger, fear, or disappointment. And while you cannot always control what happens to you, you can always control how you respond, which means the power to shape your experience, your relationships, and your personal development rests in your own hands, not in the hands of circumstances or other people. And yet, far too often, people allow external events to dictate their emotional state, reacting impulsively, habitually, or out of conditioned responses that may have been shaped by childhood experiences, cultural conditioning, or past disappointments, and each unexamined reaction reinforces patterns that keep them stuck in cycles of stress, conflict, or regret. But the moment you recognize that reaction is a choice, you open the door to conscious self-mastery, and this is where true empowerment begins. Imagine facing a situation where someone criticizes you unfairly, a project fails unexpectedly, or a friend or colleague behaves in a way that irritates or hurts you. Your first instinct may be to respond defensively, lash out, complain, or withdraw, but if you pause and remind yourself, I have a choice in how I respond. I can respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. You create space for a more deliberate, constructive, and emotionally intelligent approach. And it is in this space between stimulus and response that personal growth is cultivated, because immediate reactions are usually driven by emotion, habit, or ego, whereas conscious responses are guided by awareness, values, and long-term perspective. Positive self-talk is the engine that drives this transformation, because the narratives we tell ourselves shape how we interpret situations and how we act in them. Statements like, "I am in control of my emotions," "I can choose to respond calmly and wisely," or "This situation is an opportunity for growth and I can handle it with clarity," reinforce your ability to act intentionally rather than react impulsively. And over time, repeated practice of these affirmations rewires the mind, forming neural pathways that make conscious response the default mode rather than the exception. Every human encounters challenges, disagreements, misunderstandings, and provocations, and the difference between someone who grows through these experiences and someone who remains frustrated, stressed, or stagnant lies in their ability to recognize that reactions are choices, not automatic consequences. Understanding this allows you to reclaim agency over your life, because when you stop reacting to events or the behavior of others, you stop giving them power over your emotional state, and instead, you place that power firmly within yourself, which is the foundation of resilience, confidence, and emotional intelligence. Consider, for example, the habitual reaction to criticism. Many people either internalize it destructively, feeling anger, shame, or resentment, or externalize it destructively, responding with defensiveness, blame, or retaliation. Neither approach is productive or empowering, yet both are automatic reactions to perceived threat or injustice, and both undermine growth. But when you consciously choose a response grounded in self-awareness, reflection, and positive self-talk, you transform the encounter into a learning opportunity, demonstrating emotional control, maturity, and the ability to rise above impulses. And with each deliberate response, you reinforce a habit that strengthens over time, gradually becoming a natural, instinctive way of engaging with the world. The challenge, of course, lies in breaking old habits and interrupting the knee-jerk reactions that have been reinforced over years or decades. But this is precisely why conscious repetition, mindfulness, and affirmation are so important. Every time you pause before responding, breathe and remind yourself, "I choose how I react." You are exercising your emotional muscles, building resilience, and cultivating the capacity to respond in alignment with your values rather than your impulses. Life is full of triggers, from minor annoyances to major crises, and if you allow these triggers to dictate your behavior, you surrender your inner peace, your ability to grow, and your control over outcomes, because reactive behavior is rarely strategic, rarely constructive, and often escalates conflict rather than resolving it, whereas deliberate response, grounded in awareness and positive self-talk, enables problem-solving, strengthens relationships, and fosters self-respect, because others recognize and respond positively to calm, intentional behavior, and internally, you cultivate confidence, clarity, and emotional stability. Mastering the choice of your reactions also requires self-reflection and honesty. It requires acknowledging the times when you have reacted impulsively, understanding why, and envisioning how you might respond differently in the future. And this practice transforms mistakes from sources of shame into opportunities for growth and learning, reinforcing the principle that every situation contains within it the seeds of development, but only if you respond thoughtfully rather than react automatically. Furthermore, every choice not to react impulsively strengthens your ability to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically in high-stress situations, and to maintain your composure even when confronted with unfairness, criticism, or adversity. And this consistency builds a personal reputation for reliability, maturity, and integrity, while internally it fosters a deep sense of self-efficacy, because you know that no matter what happens externally, you retain the ultimate control over your actions. responses, and emotional state. It is also important to note that controlling your reactions does not mean suppressing emotions or ignoring your needs. It means acknowledging your feelings fully while choosing how to express them constructively, rather than allowing them to dictate behavior impulsively. And this distinction is crucial because emotional mastery is not about denying humanity. It is about exercising wisdom, discipline, and foresight. The practice of reminding yourself, I am responsible for my responses, I choose deliberately, I act with awareness, cultivates a habit of intentional living that permeates all areas of life, from personal relationships to professional interactions, from moments of stress to everyday challenges, and gradually transforms your experience from one of reactivity and chaos to one of control, composure, and empowered decision-making. Over time, this skill compounds because each conscious response reinforces neural pathways that make deliberate action more natural and automatic, creating a virtuous cycle of growth, resilience, and emotional intelligence. Life will always present obstacles, provocation, and unpredictability, but the one constant you can rely on is your ability to respond consciously, intentionally, and constructively, and this realization is liberating, because it means that no matter what happens around you, you remain the master of your own emotional state and the architect of your personal growth. Each time you practice this discipline, affirming, I control my reactions, I respond thoughtfully, I choose growth over impulse, you are training yourself to live intentionally, to navigate life with calm, clarity, and self-confidence, and to transform challenges into opportunities rather than threats. Ultimately, recognizing that every reaction is a choice empowers you to step out of the cycle of automatic, unhelpful responses and into a life of conscious, deliberate, and intentional living, where your emotions serve as information, your thoughts guide your decisions, and your actions reflect your values, principles, and long-term vision. And in this mastery lies the freedom, growth, and fulfillment that define a truly empowered life. Because the moment you embrace the idea that reactions are choices, you take ownership of your emotional state, reclaim your power, and open the door to the kind of personal development that leads to sustained happiness, resilience, and success in every area of life. Negative self-talk is one of the most powerful, yet overlooked, influences on how we feel, think, and ultimately behave, and it is something that quietly shapes our lives in ways that most people do not even notice, because while we are often quick to recognize external criticism or unfair treatment from others, we rarely examine the way we talk to ourselves in moments of stress, failure, or uncertainty, and yet the voice inside our own mind can be far more damaging or empowering than anything external, because every thought we repeat to ourselves forms a neural pattern that reinforces our beliefs, habits, and emotional responses, which means that if we habitually engage in negative self-talk, saying things like, I can't do this, I am not good enough, I always fail, or this is too hard, we are training our mind to expect failure, disappointment, and frustration, and we are conditioning our emotions to react automatically with stress, anger, or anxiety whenever challenges arise, whereas if we intentionally shift our inner dialogue to be supportive, encouraging, and growth-oriented, we create a mental environment where resilience, calm, and clarity can flourish, because positive self-talk is essentially a method of rewiring the brain to see obstacles not as threats, but as opportunities for learning, growth, and personal development. And this shift is essential for anyone seeking to master their emotions, take responsibility for their actions, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. The practice of positive self-talk begins with awareness, because you cannot change what you do not first recognize, which means you must pay close attention to the internal conversations that arise whenever you feel stressed, frustrated, or threatened, and observe without judgment how these thoughts influence your emotional state and behavior. because the moment you notice a negative thought, you gain the opportunity to intervene and replace it with a statement that reinforces control, agency, and composure, such as, "I am capable, I am calm, I can handle this situation wisely," or, "This is a challenge, but I am learning and growing through it," or, "I have the power to choose my response, and I choose clarity and peace." It may feel awkward at first, because the brain is wired to respond automatically to patterns of thought that have been reinforced over years. But with consistent practice, these affirmations gradually create new pathways that make deliberate, thoughtful responses more natural, intuitive, and automatic, replacing the habitual reactivity that often leads to conflict, stress, or regret. Negative self-talk is often rooted in fear, past experiences, or perfectionism, and it can manifest subtly through self-criticism, doubt, or pessimism, or overtly through mental narratives that exaggerate problems, catastrophize outcomes, or assign personal blame for events beyond your control and left unchecked. It sabotages confidence, erodes emotional stability, and makes it almost impossible to respond to life with calm, rational, and constructive behavior. Yet the simple act of speaking kindly and deliberately to yourself interrupts this cycle, giving you the ability to manage emotions, regulate stress, and approach challenges with a mindset that prioritizes growth over reaction. Positive self-talk also functions as a tool for emotional regulation because emotions are heavily influenced by thoughts, and when we repeatedly reinforce supportive, empowering statements, we guide our emotions toward calmness, patience, and clarity, which means that we no longer allow external events or the actions of others to dictate how we feel or act, and instead, we respond in a way that is intentional, measured, and aligned with our values and goals. For instance, when faced with criticism, instead of immediately reacting with defensiveness or self-doubt, you can pause, acknowledge your emotions, and affirm to yourself, "I can learn from this. I remain calm. I am capable of responding with clarity." And this practice not only protects your emotional well-being but also strengthens relationships, because thoughtful responses foster understanding, reduce conflict, and demonstrate maturity, empathy, and self-control, which others intuitively respect and trust. Furthermore, positive self-talk is critical in high-stress or high-pressure situations where the impulse to react emotionally is strongest, because it acts as a stabilizing force, reminding you that while you may not be able to control external circumstances, you are always in control of your internal state, your perspective, and your response. And this realization is deeply empowering because it shifts your locus of control inward, giving you agency over your emotional experience rather than allowing it to be dictated by outside forces. Developing this habit also strengthens resilience because repeated practice of encouraging, constructive internal dialogue equips you to face adversity without being overwhelmed by negative emotions, to view mistakes as opportunities rather than failures, and to maintain focus and composure even when life feels chaotic or unpredictable. And over time, this consistent reinforcement of self-directed positivity transforms not only the way you feel, but the way you act, helping you navigate challenges with calmness, confidence, and clarity, and ultimately enabling you to live a more intentional, purposeful, and empowered life. It is also important to recognize that positive self-talk is not about ignoring reality, suppressing emotions, or pretending that difficulties do not exist. Rather, it is about choosing the mental narrative that best serves your growth, emotional stability, and problem-solving capacity, acknowledging your feelings while reinforcing the mindset that you can respond thoughtfully, constructively, and wisely, and using your inner dialogue as a tool to guide behavior, instead of allowing impulses or reactive habits to dictate outcomes. By consistently replacing negative, self-defeating thoughts with positive, empowering ones, you train your mind to approach challenges with curiosity, resilience, and resourcefulness, seeing every obstacle as an opportunity to strengthen emotional control, practice deliberate responses, and expand personal growth, which over time leads to a profound transformation in mindset, behavior, and overall life experience. Each time you catch yourself engaging in negative self-talk, pause, breathe, and deliberately replace it with an affirmative, supportive statement. You are rewiring the neural pathways that shape perception, emotion, and action, and this deliberate repetition creates a powerful feedback loop where your mind begins to automatically default to empowering, growth-oriented responses even in stressful or emotionally charged situations. In essence, mastering the voice inside your head is foundational to mastering your emotions, because the way you speak to yourself determines the way you experience life, and the more intentional, positive, and growth-oriented your internal dialogue, the more resilient, composed, and effective your external responses become. Life will always present challenges, provocations, and unexpected difficulties, and you will always encounter moments when the temptation to react impulsively or succumb to negativity arises. But the difference between stagnation and growth, frustration and peace, failure and resilience, lies in your ability to consciously guide your thoughts, affirm your capabilities, and respond with intention rather than reaction. And the simple, consistent practice of positive self-talk is one of the most powerful tools you have to achieve this, because by controlling your internal dialogue, you control your emotional state, your behavior, and ultimately, the trajectory of your life. The moment you embrace this practice, choosing deliberate, empowering, and constructive self-talk over negative, reactive, or self-defeating narratives, you take a decisive step toward emotional mastery, personal growth, and sustained inner peace, because your internal dialogue shapes your perceptions, guides your decisions, and ultimately determines the quality of your life. And in that awareness lies the freedom to respond thoughtfully, grow continuously, and live intentionally. Patience is more than merely waiting. It is the conscious mastery of impulse, the deliberate practice of restraint, and one of the most underrated tools for emotional intelligence and personal growth. Because in every moment of life, we are presented with stimuli that can trigger immediate reactions, moments of frustration, impatience, anger, or anxiety, and it is our ability to navigate these moments without giving in to impulsive behavior that determines the quality of our emotional life, the strength of our relationships, and the trajectory of our personal development. Yet so often people confuse patience with passivity or weakness, believing that waiting silently or restraining themselves is a form of surrender, when in reality, patience is a sign of strength, a demonstration of self-control, and a conscious choice to prioritize long-term growth and clarity over short-term emotional satisfaction. Because when we react impulsively to every slight, frustration, or delay, we allow our emotions to dictate our actions, often leading to regret, strained relationships, and unnecessary stress, whereas practicing patience allows us to pause, reflect, and respond thoughtfully, which empowers us to handle situations more effectively, maintain inner peace, and cultivate resilience. And it is this very capacity for deliberate, measured response that separates those who thrive emotionally, socially, and professionally from those who remain reactive, frustrated, or overwhelmed by life's challenges. Patience begins with awareness, because you cannot exercise restraint if you are not conscious of the impulses rising within you. It requires the ability to notice the early signs of frustration or agitation, to recognize the physical and mental cues that signal an impending reaction, and to intervene before acting, which is why techniques such as deep breathing, mindful observation, and positive self-talk are critical tools in the development of patience, because they allow you to create a momentary pause, a space between stimulus and response, where you can choose to act intentionally rather than react automatically, and in that pause lies the true power of emotional mastery. Positive self-talk is essential in cultivating patience, because the mind tends to follow the narrative it is given, And if you reinforce thoughts like, "I cannot wait," "This is intolerable," or "I am frustrated and I have to act now," you are strengthening the reactive patterns that perpetuate stress and conflict, whereas replacing these statements with affirmations such as, "I am calm, I can handle this situation with clarity," or "I will respond thoughtfully, not impulsively," or "Patience allows me to act wisely and maintain control," gradually rewires your thought processes, enabling you to approach challenging moments with composure and intentionality. And over time, this repeated practice becomes a natural, instinctive response rather than a forced effort, creating a profound transformation in how you navigate daily life, relationships, and professional challenges. Consider the everyday situations where patience is tested: a traffic jam that makes you late, a colleague who misunderstands your intentions, a loved one who behaves in a way that frustrates you, or a project that does not progress as quickly as you had hoped. In each of these moments, your initial impulse may be to react immediately with anger, complaint, or criticism, but the moment you consciously pause and remind yourself, "I can wait, I can respond calmly, I am in control of my emotions," you not only prevent unnecessary conflict, but also strengthen your emotional resilience, because patience allows you to detach from the immediate pressure of the moment, evaluate the situation objectively, and choose a response that aligns with your values, goals, and long-term well-being, rather than being driven by short-term emotional impulses. The power of patience is compounded when combined with reflection and self-awareness, because it is not simply about enduring discomfort or postponing gratification, but about understanding the underlying causes of emotional agitation, recognizing triggers, and using these moments as opportunities for growth and learning. And as you practice patience, you begin to notice patterns in your behavior, areas where impulsive reactions arise, and ways to cultivate more deliberate, measured responses, which leads to a deeper understanding of yourself and greater mastery over your emotional life. Furthermore, patience is inherently linked to resilience, because life is unpredictable, full of challenges, delays, setbacks, and disappointments, and the ability to remain calm and composed in the face of these realities allows you to navigate them effectively without being overwhelmed. And this stability not only reduces personal stress, but also inspires confidence, trust, and respect from others, as people naturally gravitate toward those who demonstrate the ability to respond thoughtfully, maintain composure, and handle adversity with grace, which reinforces the personal and social benefits of cultivating patience as a foundational life skill. It is important to recognize that patience is not a passive state. It is an active, conscious practice that requires deliberate attention and effort, especially in the modern world where instant gratification, constant stimulation, and rapid change often tempt us to react impulsively, complain, or seek immediate resolution. And yet, by embracing patience as a deliberate choice, you develop the ability to rise above momentary frustrations, maintain clarity under pressure, and act with intention, which in turn strengthens decision-making, problem-solving, and emotional stability, because the mind that is patient is a mind that can think clearly, respond deliberately, and act strategically rather than being hijacked by reactive impulses, stress, or anger. Practicing patience also involves self-compassion, because moments of frustration, anger, or impatience are natural human experiences, and the process of developing this skill is gradual, requiring awareness, effort, and repeated practice. And each time you notice yourself becoming impatient, pause, acknowledge the feeling without judgment, and affirm, "I can handle this calmly. I am developing patience, I am growing." You reinforce the habit of intentional response, creating a feedback loop that strengthens over time and gradually transforms your approach to challenges, interpersonal interactions, and personal growth. Over time, the consistent practice of patience combined with mindful awareness and positive self-talk, transforms not only your external behavior, but also your internal experience, allowing you to navigate life with calmness, clarity, and confidence, and creating a sense of empowerment that comes from knowing that you are not at the mercy of your impulses or circumstances, but rather capable of responding thoughtfully, intentionally, and wisely in every moment, because the true measure of patience is not how long you can wait, but how consciously, deliberately, and skillfully you manage your impulses, emotions, and reactions, turning every challenge into an opportunity for growth, mastery, and inner peace. Ultimately, patience is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence, self-mastery, and personal growth, because it enables you to navigate life with composure, respond to challenges with wisdom, and cultivate resilience, self-control, and clarity, and by practicing patience deliberately, reinforcing it through positive self-talk, and using it as a tool to guide your responses rather than react impulsively, you lay the foundation for a life defined not by frustration, anger, or reactive behavior, but by intentionality, empowerment, and continuous growth, because the more you choose patience, the more you demonstrate to yourself and to the world that you are capable of mastering your impulses, managing your emotions, and responding thoughtfully, creating a life of balance, peace, and lasting personal strength. You cannot control what others do, but you can always control your response, and understanding this principle is one of the most powerful steps toward emotional mastery, personal growth, and the ability to navigate life with calm, clarity, and resilience, because too often people allow the behavior, words, and decisions of others to dictate their emotional state, creating a cycle of frustration, anger, resentment, and stress that ultimately erodes both happiness and effectiveness. And yet the truth is that external events, circumstances, and the actions of other people are beyond your direct control, which means that any effort to change them is not only often futile, but also a distraction from the one area where you do have complete control: your own thoughts, emotions, and actions. And when you accept this reality fully, you gain the freedom to respond deliberately rather than react impulsively, which is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, resilience, and sustained personal growth. Every day, life presents situations where others behave in ways that challenge you. Colleagues who misunderstand or criticize, friends or family members who disappoint, strangers who act rudely, or circumstances that seem unfair. And the automatic human reaction is often to blame, argue, resist, or vent, thinking that if you could only change them or make them act differently, your life would be easier, happier, or less stressful. But this mindset gives away your power because it ties your emotional well-being to factors outside your control, and in doing so, it places your peace, growth, and happiness in the hands of others, leaving you vulnerable to manipulation, disappointment, and emotional turmoil. Whereas when you shift your focus inward and remind yourself, "I cannot control them, but I can control how I respond," you reclaim that power and create the foundation for true stability, maturity, and personal empowerment. Positive self-talk is critical in this process because the stories we tell ourselves about other people's behavior directly influence our emotions and actions. When you find yourself thinking, "They made me angry," "They are unfair," or "This is their fault," you are surrendering control of your emotional state to external circumstances. But by consciously reframing your internal dialogue with affirmations like, "I choose my response," "I am calm," "I respond with clarity and wisdom," you shift your mindset from reactivity to intentionality, reinforcing the idea that your emotions, actions, and growth are your responsibility alone, and that no one else has the authority to dictate them. Understanding that you cannot control others also fosters patience and tolerance, because you begin to accept that people will act according to their own perspectives, experiences, and limitations, which means that their behavior is often a reflection of their inner world, rather than a personal attack or a judgment on your worth. And when you internalize this truth, you reduce emotional reactivity, cultivate empathy, and respond with a calm that diffuses tension rather than escalating it, which not only preserves your peace, but also strengthens relationships and communication by modeling composure and emotional intelligence, demonstrating that maturity is reflected not in controlling others, but in controlling yourself. Consider situations where someone behaves unfairly at work or miscommunicates in a personal relationship. The initial impulse might be to react defensively, argue, or assign blame, believing that if only the other person acted differently, the problem would disappear. But the reality is that you cannot make them change, and investing energy in attempting to control their actions only increases stress and frustration, whereas choosing to pause, breathe, and remind yourself, "I cannot control them, but I can control my reaction," allows you to approach the situation strategically, responding with insight and composure rather than impulsive emotion, and in doing so, you maintain your integrity, preserve your energy, and maximize your effectiveness, because the power to influence your own life is far greater than any attempt to influence someone else's behavior externally. This principle also applies to unexpected challenges and setbacks caused by others. Rather than dwelling on blame or frustration, you can shift your focus to the actionable choices available to you, asking, "What can I do in this situation? How can I respond wisely? How can I maintain my peace?" And when this mindset becomes habitual, you develop a resilience that allows you to face adversity without being overwhelmed, to navigate difficult conversations without losing composure, and to thrive in situations where others might feel powerless, stressed, or reactive. Because your sense of control comes from within, and no external force can take it away unless you allow it. In addition, embracing the concept that you cannot control others promotes self-reflection and accountability, because it forces you to examine your own behavior, thoughts, and reactions, rather than projecting responsibility for your emotions onto external circumstances or individuals. And this shift from external blame to internal ownership is transformative, because it teaches you that personal growth, emotional mastery, and peace are cultivated through self-awareness, self-discipline, and the conscious management of your own mind, rather than through attempts to change or control the world around you, which is inherently unpredictable and often beyond your influence. Patience, positive self-talk, and deliberate response become essential tools in this practice, because they provide both the structure and reinforcement necessary to maintain control over your emotions, even in challenging or provoking situations. And by repeatedly affirming statements like, "I choose how I react," "I maintain calm," "I take responsibility for my emotional state," you create a mental habit that strengthens over time, making intentional, measured responses your default mode, rather than impulsive, reactive behavior, which in turn reduces stress, improves relationships, and increases confidence in your ability to navigate life effectively. Furthermore, understanding that you cannot control others encourages a mindset of acceptance without resignation, meaning that you acknowledge reality as it is without wasting energy on resistance or frustration, and in doing so, you open the door to proactive problem-solving, creative thinking, and strategic decision-making, because your focus is on what you can influence, your thoughts, actions, and emotional responses, rather than what you cannot, which is not only more effective, but also far less exhausting and far more empowering, because it allows you to invest your energy where it matters most, and to cultivate a sense of mastery over your own life. Life will continually present situations where people act unpredictably, make mistakes, or behave in ways that frustrate, disappoint, or challenge you, and the temptation to react emotionally or assign blame will always be present. But the strength, peace, and growth that come from mastering your responses far outweigh the temporary satisfaction of venting or blaming, because in every interaction, in every challenge, in every provocation, you have the opportunity to practice self-control, positive self-talk, and deliberate, thoughtful response, which over time becomes an unshakable habit that enhances every aspect of your life. By internalizing the truth that you cannot control what others do, but can always control your response, you reclaim your power, maintain emotional stability, foster resilience, strengthen relationships, and cultivate a mindset that is prepared to grow, learn, and thrive regardless of circumstances. And in that mastery lies the freedom, peace, and empowerment that define a life of intentionality, maturity, and continuous personal development, because the ultimate realization is that no one else holds the key to your emotional state or growth. You do, and embracing that responsibility is the foundation of lasting success, fulfillment, and inner calm. Mistakes are not failures, they are opportunities for growth, learning, and self-improvement, yet so often people approach errors with fear, shame, or frustration, immediately looking for someone or something to blame, rather than examining the situation for lessons and insights that can propel them forward. And this tendency to assign blame, whether to others, circumstances, or even oneself, creates a cycle of defensiveness and stagnation that inhibits personal development, limits emotional intelligence, and undermines resilience, because when we focus on fault instead of growth, we are essentially surrendering control of our progress to external factors, and we are allowing reactive emotions such as anger, guilt, or frustration to dictate our responses, which often leads to repeated mistakes, strained relationships, and unnecessary stress, whereas approaching mistakes as opportunities shifts the focus from blame to curiosity, from frustration to reflection, and from helplessness to empowerment, and it is in this shift that true personal growth begins. Every time a mistake occurs, whether in your personal life, professional endeavors, or interactions with others, there is a choice. You can react impulsively with blame, defensiveness, or anger, or you can pause, observe, and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I improve? What steps can I take to respond more effectively next time? This moment of conscious reflection is the essence of emotional intelligence, because it requires you to separate the event itself from your automatic emotional response, to notice how your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors interact, and to deliberately choose the response that aligns with growth, integrity, and composure. And each time you practice this deliberate reflection, you are strengthening the mental and emotional pathways that enable you to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, which over time becomes an instinctive habit that enhances all areas of your life. Positive self-talk plays a pivotal role in this process, because the internal narrative we repeat to ourselves shapes not only our emotional reactions, but also our capacity to learn from mistakes, take responsibility, and grow. And when confronted with an error, telling yourself, I am capable of learning from this. I grow stronger with every challenge. I respond thoughtfully and intentionally, reinforces the mindset necessary to extract value from mistakes and prevents negative spirals of self-criticism, shame, or avoidance, whereas internal dialogue rooted in blame, regret, or fear only reinforces reactive patterns, undermines confidence, and diminishes resilience, creating a cycle that perpetuates stress and limits personal growth. Consider, for instance, a professional setting where a project does not go as planned, and the initial response may be to blame a colleague, a client, or circumstances beyond your control. The moment you notice this impulse and instead choose to reflect on the factors within your control, ask, what can I do differently? How can I improve my approach? What did I learn from this experience? And affirm, I am learning and growing. I take responsibility for my part. I will respond wisely next time. You shift from reaction to response, from blame to ownership, and from stagnation to growth. And this shift is not only empowering for your personal development, but also enhances relationships, trust, and professional credibility, because others perceive calm, thoughtful, and responsible behavior as a sign of maturity, competence, and reliability, which strengthens your social and professional influence. Mistakes are inevitable because life is complex, unpredictable, and filled with variables beyond anyone's control, and to react with blame or frustration is a natural instinct. Yet the individuals who thrive, adapt, and grow are those who have trained themselves to pause, reflect, and use errors as stepping stones rather than obstacles, because each mistake contains within it the seeds of insight, resilience, and improvement, waiting to be recognized and acted upon. And by cultivating a mindset that sees failure not as a personal indictment, but as an invitation to learn, you develop the mental flexibility, adaptability, and emotional regulation necessary to navigate life successfully. The power of this approach lies in its ability to transform challenges into opportunities for mastery. By consciously choosing to respond thoughtfully, take responsibility, and affirm your capability, you strengthen emotional intelligence, cultivate self-confidence, and build resilience, because you learn to trust yourself to handle difficulties effectively, to extract lessons from setbacks, and to maintain composure even in the face of adversity. And over time, this practice creates a self-reinforcing cycle where growth becomes habitual, mistakes become less threatening, and challenges become opportunities for further development, shaping a life that is proactive rather than reactive, intentional rather than impulsive, and empowered rather than victimized by circumstance. Emotional mastery is closely intertwined with this perspective, because responding thoughtfully to mistakes requires awareness of your internal state, recognition of automatic reactions, and the deliberate choice to act in alignment with your values and long-term goals, which means that every mistake becomes not a source of stress or shame, but a practice field for cultivating patience, self-reflection, and deliberate response. And this repeated practice strengthens your ability to handle increasingly complex or emotionally charged situations with clarity, composure, and intelligence, creating a foundation of resilience and confidence that supports all areas of life, from personal relationships to professional endeavors, from goal setting to problem solving, and from managing conflict to navigating change. Moreover, the habit of learning from mistakes reduces fear, builds courage, and enhances adaptability, because when you approach errors as opportunities rather than threats, you cultivate a mindset that is willing to take calculated risks, embrace new challenges, and persevere through setbacks without being paralyzed by anxiety, self-doubt, or blame. And this resilience becomes a defining characteristic of personal strength and long-term success. By consistently practicing reflection, self-awareness, and positive self-talk in the face of mistakes, you shift the locus of control inward, recognizing that while you cannot prevent all errors or control the actions of others, you can control how you respond, what you learn, and how you grow. And in doing so, you reclaim power over your life, develop mastery over your emotions, and create a trajectory of continuous improvement. Because the true value of a mistake is not in the event itself, but in how you respond, and the individuals who thrive in life are those who consistently choose growth over reaction, learning over blame, and empowerment over frustration, recognizing that every challenge and error carries within it the potential to strengthen character, enhance resilience, and expand personal wisdom. And by embracing this perspective, you transform your life from one dominated by reactive patterns, stress, and blame into one defined by intentional action, thoughtful response, and ongoing self-improvement, creating a foundation for lasting success, emotional stability, and fulfillment. Ultimately, the decision to see mistakes as teachers rather than threats is a deliberate, conscious choice that shapes not only how you respond in the moment, but how you navigate your entire life, because when you approach setbacks with curiosity, reflection, and positive self-talk, you foster resilience, confidence, and emotional mastery, and you step into a pattern of growth that reinforces itself continuously, ensuring that every mistake becomes a stepping stone toward the stronger, wiser, and more capable version of yourself, proving that personal growth, emotional intelligence, and mastery of one's reactions are cultivated not in the absence of mistakes, but precisely through the thoughtful, deliberate, and intentional response to them. Forgiveness is not about excusing the behavior of others, condoning wrongdoing, or pretending that pain and disappointment never occurred. Rather, it is a deliberate act of reclaiming your peace, preserving your emotional well-being, and freeing yourself from the weight of resentment, anger, or grudges that can silently dictate your thoughts, reactions, and overall quality of life, because holding on to bitterness is one of the most destructive habits we can cultivate, not only eroding our mental and emotional health, but also influencing the way we interact with others, make decisions, and navigate challenges. And yet so many people resist forgiveness, mistakenly believing that letting go of anger or blame diminishes justice or rewards harmful behavior, when in fact forgiveness is an internal act of empowerment, a conscious decision to release the emotional burden and regain control over your life, which in turn enables clarity, resilience, and thoughtful response in situations where you would otherwise be reactive, defensive, or emotionally compromised. And it is precisely in this choice to forgive that true emotional mastery and personal growth are cultivated. Forgiveness begins with awareness and self-reflection, because before you can release resentment toward others, you must first acknowledge your own feelings, recognize the impact of the event or behavior that caused pain, and understand how clinging to anger or blame is affecting your own thoughts, emotions, and behavior, because the moment you identify the ways in which bitterness controls your mental state, you create the opportunity to consciously intervene and reclaim your power, reminding yourself, I choose my peace. I release resentment. I am not defined by their actions, which shifts the locus of control inward, placing responsibility for your emotional state squarely in your own hands rather than in the actions of others. Positive self-talk plays a critical role in the process of forgiveness, because the narratives we repeat to ourselves shape not only our emotions but also our responses. And when we reinforce thoughts such as, I cannot forgive, they do not deserve it, we perpetuate cycles of anger, frustration, and emotional reactivity, whereas affirmations like, I choose peace, I release this burden, I am in control of my emotions, or forgiveness is my gift to myself, cultivate a mindset that prioritizes calm, clarity, and intentional response, strengthening the mental and emotional pathways that allow forgiveness to become a habit rather than a forced effort. And over time, this practice rewires the brain to default to deliberate, thoughtful emotional management rather than reactive resentment, which significantly enhances personal resilience and overall well-being. Consider situations where someone has wronged you. Whether a friend, colleague, family member, or even a stranger, the natural instinct might be to harbor anger, dwell on the injustice, or plan retaliation, thinking that such responses are necessary for protection or justice. But in reality, these reactions often prolong suffering, increase stress, and interfere with your ability to respond thoughtfully, because when you are consumed by anger or resentment, your focus shifts away from solutions, growth, and emotional stability, and instead centers on perceived injustice, which diminishes clarity, drains energy, and perpetuates emotional turmoil, whereas choosing forgiveness allows you to disengage from the cycle of negativity, regain focus, and approach life with renewed calm, composure, and agency, because the act of letting go is an internal declaration that you will not surrender your peace to circumstances beyond your control. Forgiveness is also deeply tied to self-compassion, because it involves recognizing that holding on to anger or blame ultimately harms you more than anyone else, and that by choosing to release these emotions, you are prioritizing your own mental and emotional health, cultivating a sense of inner freedom, and reinforcing the principle that your well-being is your responsibility, not dictated by the actions or choices of others. And this understanding is transformative because it shifts focus from external events to internal mastery, allowing you to navigate relationships, challenges, and disappointments with greater wisdom, calm, and resilience. The process of forgiveness is not instantaneous. It requires practice, patience, and repeated reinforcement because old patterns of resentment, bitterness, and judgment are deeply ingrained and often resurface unexpectedly. Yet each time you pause, acknowledge your feelings, and consciously remind yourself, I release this. I choose peace. I am in control of my response. You strengthen the neural pathways that support deliberate emotional management, gradually transforming forgiveness from an occasional effort into a habitual mindset that shapes the way you respond to life, both internally and externally. And over time, this practice fosters greater clarity, self-control, and resilience, enhancing both personal and interpersonal dynamics. Furthermore, forgiveness does not mean that you ignore boundaries, excuse harm, or continue to allow toxic behavior. Rather, it means that you separate your emotional response from the actions of others, releasing the grip of resentment and anger so that you can engage with the world from a place of clarity and strength, making decisions that are thoughtful, intentional, and aligned with your values, rather than reactive, impulsive, or emotionally driven. And this distinction is crucial because it underscores that forgiveness is a tool for empowerment rather than passivity, a conscious act of taking control over your emotional state rather than surrendering it to the actions of others. When combined with positive self-talk and deliberate pause, forgiveness also enhances resilience and emotional intelligence because it allows you to approach difficult situations with clarity, assess challenges objectively, and respond thoughtfully, rather than being hijacked by reactive emotions. And as this practice becomes habitual, you begin to notice that your overall stress decreases, relationships improve, and your capacity to handle adversity strengthens because the act of letting go frees mental and emotional resources that were previously consumed by resentment, anger, or blame, redirecting them toward problem-solving, self-improvement, and deliberate action. Life will continually present situations where forgiveness is tested. People will act unfairly, disappoint you, or behave in ways that challenge your patience and integrity. But the consistent practice of releasing resentment, affirming your emotional control, and choosing peace over reaction transforms these moments from sources of ongoing stress into opportunities for growth, reflection, and personal empowerment. Because the moment you reclaim control over your response, you remove the power of external events to dictate your emotions, thoughts, or actions, and you create a foundation for lasting inner peace, emotional resilience, and thoughtful engagement with the world. Ultimately, forgiveness is a gift to yourself, a conscious declaration that you will not allow the actions, mistakes, or failures of others to compromise your well-being or limit your growth. And by practicing this deliberately, reinforcing it with positive self-talk, and integrating it as a habitual mindset, you strengthen your emotional intelligence, expand your capacity for calm and clarity, and cultivate a life in which challenges, conflicts, and disappointments are met with thoughtful response, intentionality, and a sense of personal mastery, because in the choice to forgive lies the freedom to live fully, think clearly, and act wisely, unburdened by the weight of resentment, and empowered to navigate life with composure, resilience, and inner peace, demonstrating that the greatest control we can exercise is not over others, but over ourselves, and the most profound growth comes from mastering our own minds and hearts. Gratitude is not merely a polite response to kindness or a superficial acknowledgement of positive events. It is a deliberate practice that reshapes the mind, emotions, and even behavior, because the act of consciously recognizing the blessings, opportunities, and lessons present in life transforms the way we perceive challenges, setbacks, and everyday experiences, creating a mindset that is resilient, balanced, and empowered. And yet so many people overlook the profound impact of gratitude, focusing instead on what is missing, unfair, or frustrating, which reinforces negativity, dissatisfaction, and emotional reactivity, because the mind naturally dwells on threats, problems, and scarcity unless it is intentionally directed toward appreciation and acknowledgement, and this habitual focus on what is lacking fosters stress, frustration, and impulsive reactions, whereas cultivating gratitude interrupts these patterns, allowing us to respond to life with calm, clarity, and constructive action, because when you train your mind to notice what is working, what is positive, and what can be appreciated, you shift from a reactive, deficit-oriented mindset to a proactive, abundance-oriented mindset that supports personal growth, emotional intelligence, and thoughtful decision-making. Practicing gratitude begins with awareness, because you cannot appreciate what you do not first recognize, which means observing not only the big moments of success or joy but also the subtle, often overlooked aspects of daily life. The support of friends, the lessons in challenges, the progress in small goals, the simple beauty of a moment or experience. And by pausing to notice these things, you create a conscious mental habit that reinforces positivity, resilience, and calm, because gratitude engages the brain in a process of evaluating life, not solely through the lens of problems or deficiencies, but through the lens of value, growth, and opportunity, which fundamentally alters both emotional responses and behavioral patterns, strengthening the capacity for thoughtful, deliberate action rather than reactive, impulsive behavior. Positive self-talk amplifies the effects of gratitude, because the narratives we repeat to ourselves shape perception, emotion, and response. And when we reinforce statements such as, "I am grateful for this opportunity," "I appreciate the lessons in this challenge," "I notice the good around me," we train our mind to seek positives, recognize growth, and focus on solutions rather than problems, which in turn reduces stress, enhances patience, and supports emotional regulation, because gratitude fundamentally shifts the internal dialogue from scarcity, frustration, and complaint to acknowledgement, appreciation, and proactive engagement, and this shift is crucial for mastering emotional responses, strengthening relationships, and maintaining resilience in the face of adversity. Consider moments when challenges arise, work deadlines are tight, a relationship faces tension, a plan goes awry, or a personal goal feels distant, and the initial response may often be stress, irritation, or frustration, because the mind focuses on what is missing or what has gone wrong. But the practice of gratitude allows you to pause, recognize what is still positive, functional, or under your control, and affirm, "I am grateful for the progress I have made. I am grateful for the lessons in this challenge. I choose to respond thoughtfully." And in doing so, you shift from emotional reactivity to intentional response, from stress and frustration to clarity, resilience, and calm, because gratitude reorients attention toward what is constructive, available, and meaningful, creating the mental space necessary for deliberate decision-making, problem-solving, and relationship management. Cultivating gratitude also enhances self-awareness and emotional intelligence, because it encourages reflection on the interplay between events, perceptions, and responses, allowing you to recognize how habitual focus on negativity, blame, or scarcity has shaped past reactions, and how conscious attention to positive aspects, lessons, and strengths can transform emotional responses, reinforce self-control, and support growth, because every instance of gratitude strengthens neural pathways associated with positive thinking, resilience, and adaptive behavior, gradually making calm, thoughtful, and deliberate responses more natural, intuitive, and habitual, even in challenging or emotionally charged circumstances. Moreover, gratitude fosters a sense of empowerment, because it redirects attention from external limitations, frustrations, or perceived injustices toward internal agency, choice, and perspective, reminding you that while you cannot always control events or the actions of others, you can control how you interpret and respond to them, and this control is the foundation of emotional mastery, personal growth, and resilient thinking, because every time you consciously acknowledge what is positive, functional, or valuable, you are reinforcing the mindset that you can face difficulties with composure, make thoughtful decisions, and act in alignment with your values, rather than being hijacked by automatic emotional reactions or frustration. The habitual practice of gratitude also strengthens relationships, because when you recognize and express appreciation for the contributions, support, or positive qualities of others, you foster empathy, connection, and mutual respect, which in turn encourages collaboration, trust, and constructive communication. And the more you focus on acknowledging positive aspects of interactions and relationships, the less reactive, defensive, or judgmental your responses become, because the mind trained in gratitude naturally seeks understanding, cooperation, and constructive engagement rather than blame, criticism, or conflict, which significantly enhances both personal and professional dynamics. Gratitude is particularly powerful when combined with deliberate self-talk and reflection, because affirming statements such as, "I am grateful for my ability to respond thoughtfully," or "I notice the lessons and opportunities in every challenge," or "I appreciate the growth that comes from this situation," reinforce neural patterns associated with deliberate, controlled, and resilient emotional responses, while simultaneously weakening the automatic pathways that lead to stress, reactive behavior, or frustration. And over time, this deliberate mental training creates a habitual mindset in which gratitude, calmness, and intentionality are the default mode rather than exceptions, which profoundly enhances emotional regulation, decision-making, and overall well-being. Life will inevitably present setbacks, challenges, and provocations, and the temptation to focus on what is wrong, missing, or unfair will always be present. Yet the consistent practice of gratitude shifts perspective, enabling you to recognize and amplify what is positive, functional, and meaningful, and in doing so reduces stress, enhances composure, and fosters thoughtful, intentional responses, because the mental and emotional energy that would otherwise be spent on frustration, blame, or negativity is redirected toward growth, problem solving, and deliberate action. And the more you cultivate this skill, the more it becomes a natural, automatic, and empowering way of engaging with the world. Ultimately, gratitude is not a superficial attitude or occasional practice. It is a conscious choice to perceive life through a lens of abundance, learning, and appreciation, which directly enhances emotional intelligence, resilience, and personal growth, because the act of focusing on what is meaningful, positive, and valuable strengthens your ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, fosters clarity of mind, reinforces composure under pressure, and transforms challenges into opportunities for insight, improvement, and empowerment. And when combined with positive self-talk, reflection, and deliberate awareness, gratitude becomes a powerful, ongoing mechanism for shaping not only emotional responses, but also relationships, decisions, and the trajectory of your life, proving that the practice of gratitude is not only an emotional tool, but a fundamental pillar of intentional, empowered, and growth-oriented living. Boundaries are not walls meant to isolate or push others away. They are clearly defined limits that protect your emotional, mental, and physical well-being, and they are essential for cultivating self-respect, maintaining healthy relationships, and exercising control over your life. Because without boundaries, you risk allowing others to dictate your emotions, decisions, and behaviors, often leading to resentment, frustration, stress, and a loss of personal power. And yet many people struggle to establish or maintain boundaries because they fear conflict, rejection, or appearing selfish. not realizing that boundaries are a fundamental expression of self-responsibility and emotional intelligence, and that they provide the structure necessary to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, to preserve your peace, and to cultivate growth in all areas of life. Establishing boundaries begins with self-awareness, because you cannot communicate or enforce limits if you do not first understand your own needs, values, and priorities, which requires reflection on what situations, behaviors, or relationships challenge your emotional balance or undermine your sense of agency, and identifying these areas allows you to set limits consciously, rather than reacting out of frustration or resentment when your energy or emotional well-being is compromised. And this proactive approach is crucial because it shifts the focus from external control to internal mastery, ensuring that your responses are deliberate, intentional, and aligned with your values, rather than reactive or conditioned by others' actions. Positive self-talk is instrumental in maintaining boundaries, because the internal dialogue you repeat to yourself reinforces your sense of worth, clarity, and conviction. And when you affirm statements like, "I deserve respect," "I choose how I allow others to treat me," "My peace is my responsibility," you strengthen the mental and emotional framework that supports boundary setting, and you counteract tendencies toward people-pleasing, overcommitment, or reactive compliance, which often undermine emotional stability, personal growth, and relationship health, whereas self-doubt, guilt, or internalized criticism weakens the capacity to assert limits, leaving you vulnerable to manipulation, stress, and imbalance, and ultimately eroding the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively in challenging situations. Boundaries serve multiple purposes. They protect your energy, clarify expectations, and provide the space necessary for deliberate and thoughtful responses, because when you know your limits and communicate them clearly, you reduce the likelihood of emotional overwhelm, resentment, and conflict, allowing interactions to occur within a framework of respect, understanding, and mutual accountability. And in doing so, you not only preserve your own peace, but also model emotional intelligence and integrity for others, fostering healthier, more sustainable relationships built on clarity, honesty, and mutual respect. Consider common scenarios in personal, professional, or social contexts where boundaries are tested. Colleagues may assign tasks beyond your capacity. Friends or family may overstep emotional or practical limits, or relationships may demand more time, energy, or emotional labor than you can reasonably provide. And without clear boundaries, these situations can lead to stress, resentment, and reactive behavior, whereas with boundaries in place, you can assertively communicate your limits, negotiate expectations, and respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively, preserving both your well-being and the quality of the interaction, because boundaries create the necessary space for measured, intentional, and emotionally intelligent responses. Practicing boundaries also involves self-compassion and courage, because asserting limits often triggers discomfort, fear of conflict, or guilt, and yet recognizing that maintaining boundaries is a form of self-respect and self-care allows you to navigate these challenges with confidence, clarity, and calm, knowing that prioritizing your emotional and mental well-being is not selfish, but essential for sustainable personal growth, resilience, and effectiveness in all areas of life, and that it empowers you to engage with others from a position of strength rather than reactive vulnerability. Furthermore, boundaries support emotional regulation because they prevent overstimulation, overcommitment, and depletion, which are common triggers for impulsive reactions, stress, and frustration. And by maintaining limits that honor your needs and capacity, you create a mental and emotional environment that is conducive to thoughtful, deliberate responses, enabling you to manage conflicts, challenges, and high-pressure situations with composure, clarity, and integrity, because the energy and focus that would otherwise be drained by unchecked demands or overexposure are preserved for intentional action, strategic decision-making, and personal growth. The process of establishing and maintaining boundaries is ongoing because life circumstances, relationships, and personal priorities evolve over time, and what was an adequate limit yesterday may need adjustment today, requiring continuous self-reflection, honest evaluation, and reinforcement through positive self-talk and conscious action. And as this practice becomes habitual, boundary setting shifts from a reactive, defensive behavior to an intuitive, confident, and proactive habit, supporting emotional mastery, personal empowerment, and the capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively in all areas of life. Effective boundaries are communicated clearly and respectfully, without aggression, defensiveness, or hostility, because the goal is not to control or isolate others, but to protect your own well-being and promote mutual respect. And when boundaries are communicated with calm clarity, assertiveness, and empathy, they enhance relationships, reduce misunderstandings, and prevent the escalation of conflicts, while simultaneously reinforcing your own sense of agency, self-respect, and emotional stability, creating a framework in which thoughtful, intentional interactions can flourish. Life will continually present situations where boundaries are tested, intentionally or unintentionally, because others may not understand your needs, may have conflicting priorities, or may push limits based on their own patterns. Yet the consistent practice of maintaining boundaries, reinforced through positive self-talk, reflection, and deliberate awareness, ensures that you remain centered, empowered, and capable of responding thoughtfully rather than reactively. And over time, this consistency fosters resilience, confidence, and a deep sense of personal control, because you are no longer at the mercy of others' demands, expectations, or behaviors, and instead are engaging with life from a position of strength, clarity, and self-determination. Ultimately, boundaries are a foundational tool for emotional intelligence, self-mastery, and sustainable personal growth, because they provide the structure necessary to navigate complex interpersonal, professional, and personal situations without compromising your peace, energy, or values. And by practicing clear, consistent, and compassionate boundary setting, supported by positive self-talk and deliberate reflection, you cultivate a life in which emotional stability, thoughtful responses, and intentional action are the default mode, rather than exceptions, and you demonstrate that true strength lies not in controlling others, reacting impulsively, or suppressing needs, but in defining, maintaining, and honoring limits that support your well-being, growth, and capacity to engage with the world with calm, clarity, and confidence, proving that boundaries are not barriers, but bridges to intentional, empowered, and emotionally intelligent living. Self-discipline is the bridge between intention and action, the mechanism that transforms goals, values, and aspirations into tangible results, yet it is often misunderstood as rigid restriction or harsh self-denial, when in fact it is the conscious and deliberate practice of aligning behavior with long-term objectives, values, and priorities, which requires awareness, commitment, and the consistent management of impulses, distractions, and emotions, because every day presents countless opportunities to act in ways that either support growth or perpetuate stagnation. And without self-discipline, the mind and emotions are easily hijacked by immediate gratification, reactive impulses, or external pressures, leading to inconsistent effort, frustration, and unfulfilled potential, whereas cultivating self-discipline empowers you to maintain focus, control responses, and make intentional choices that serve your long-term well-being, growth, and success. And this mastery over oneself is a fundamental cornerstone of emotional intelligence, resilience, and personal empowerment. Developing self-discipline begins with awareness, because you cannot control behaviors or impulses that you do not first recognize, which means observing how you respond to stress, temptation, distractions, and challenges, and identifying patterns that undermine your goals or emotional stability, because every unchecked reaction, procrastination, or impulsive decision is a missed opportunity to reinforce self-control and intentional action, and by recognizing these moments, you create the foundation for conscious intervention, allowing you to pause, reflect, and choose the response that aligns with your values, priorities, and long-term objectives, rather than succumbing to reactive behavior, fleeting desires, or external pressures. Positive self-talk is a crucial component of building and sustaining self-discipline because the internal dialogue we engage in either strengthens resolve or erodes it. And when you reinforce statements like, "I am committed," "I make deliberate choices," "I act in alignment with my goals," you strengthen the mental pathways that support intentional action, resilience, and consistency, whereas self-critical, doubtful, or defeatist thoughts weaken the capacity to maintain focus, manage impulses, and persevere through challenges, creating a cycle of inconsistency, frustration, and emotional instability, because the mind tends to follow the narrative it is given, and repeated internal reinforcement shapes behavior, habit, and emotional response, which is why deliberate, constructive self-talk is essential for cultivating lasting self-discipline. Consider everyday situations where discipline is required, resisting distractions when working toward a goal, maintaining composure in emotionally charged interactions, adhering to commitments despite fatigue or discomfort, or consistently practicing habits that build long-term success and growth. In each case, the impulse may be to seek immediate comfort, gratification, or avoidance, but self-discipline allows you to pause, recognize the consequences of impulsive action, and choose deliberate behavior that aligns with your long-term objectives. And by doing so repeatedly, you gradually create a pattern of consistent, intentional, and effective action, which strengthens confidence, emotional resilience, and personal mastery, because every deliberate choice to prioritize long-term benefits over immediate impulses reinforces neural pathways that support self-control, focused attention, and thoughtful behavior, making disciplined action increasingly automatic and intuitive over time. Self-discipline is also deeply tied to emotional regulation, because impulsive reactions are often driven by unregulated emotions such as frustration, anger, fear, or desire, and without the ability to consciously manage these impulses, behavior is reactive rather than intentional, leading to patterns of regret, conflict, and inconsistency, whereas cultivating self-discipline strengthens the capacity to observe emotions without being controlled by them, to pause before reacting, and to select actions that reflect values, priorities, and long-term goals, which not only enhances personal effectiveness, but also fosters emotional intelligence, resilience, and constructive relationships, because others respond positively to individuals who can maintain composure, act deliberately, and make choices that are thoughtful rather than reactive. The development of self-discipline requires patience, because it is a skill cultivated gradually through consistent practice, reflection, and reinforcement, and the process is often met with challenges, setbacks, and moments of temptation, because the human mind and body are naturally drawn to immediate comfort, relief, and gratification, and learning to delay, redirect, or manage impulses requires conscious effort and repetition. Yet each moment of intentional action strengthens the habit of discipline, gradually transforming behaviors from reactive to deliberate, from inconsistent to reliable, and from impulsive to intentional, creating a foundation for mastery over oneself, sustained growth, and long-term achievement, because the brain and nervous system respond to repeated patterns, making disciplined behavior increasingly intuitive, natural, and automatic over time. Self-discipline is not synonymous with rigidity, harshness, or self-punishment. Rather, it is the conscious alignment of actions with values, goals, and priorities, guided by reflection, awareness, and positive reinforcement, because true discipline allows for thoughtful flexibility, intentional choice, and strategic engagement with challenges and opportunities rather than automatic reaction or avoidance, and it empowers you to navigate life with composure, resilience, and integrity, because every decision is evaluated not by immediate impulse, but by long-term alignment, effectiveness, and personal growth, and the ability to consistently act in alignment with one's values fosters a sense of control, confidence, and empowerment that permeates every aspect of life. Practicing self-discipline also strengthens perseverance and grit because it requires commitment to long-term objectives despite obstacles, distractions, or discomfort, and each successful moment of restraint, focus, or intentional action reinforces the belief in one's capacity to endure, adapt, and overcome, which builds confidence, emotional stability, and sustained motivation, because mastery over oneself becomes both a practical skill and a source of intrinsic empowerment, proving that the ability to act deliberately, rather than react impulsively, is a central component of personal growth, achievement, and emotional intelligence. Life will continually present opportunities to test self-discipline, whether through internal temptations, external pressures, or challenging circumstances, and without deliberate practice, it is easy to succumb to short-term desires, emotional impulses, or reactive patterns, yet the consistent cultivation of self-discipline, reinforced by positive self-talk, reflection, and conscious awareness, ensures that each challenge becomes an opportunity to strengthen control, align actions with values, and cultivate resilience. And over time, this practice leads to a life characterized by thoughtful decision-making, consistent progress, emotional stability, and the capacity to respond intentionally in any situation rather than being driven by reactive impulses, stress, or circumstance. Ultimately, self-discipline is the essential mechanism for translating intention into action, aspiration into achievement, and values into consistent, deliberate behavior, because it allows you to act with awareness, manage impulses, regulate emotions, and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, creating a life in which personal growth, emotional mastery, and sustained success are the natural outcomes of conscious, intentional, and empowered living, and when combined with positive self-talk, reflection, and awareness, self-discipline becomes a powerful tool for shaping not only actions and results, but also mindset, character, and the trajectory of your entire life, demonstrating that the ability to master oneself is the cornerstone of lasting fulfillment, effectiveness, and personal empowerment. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully present in the moment, intentionally observing your thoughts, emotions, and surroundings without judgment, and it is a fundamental tool for emotional mastery, personal growth, and deliberate, thoughtful response, because so often people live on autopilot, reacting impulsively to stimuli, circumstances, and interactions without awareness of their own internal state, and this lack of presence leads to stress, frustration, reactive behavior, and missed opportunities for clarity, insight, and growth, whereas cultivating mindfulness allows you to pause, assess, and respond intentionally, creating a mental environment in which conscious choices, deliberate actions, and emotional regulation become habitual. And over time, this practice reshapes both your mind and your life, because the more aware you are of your internal and external experiences, the more empowered you are to navigate challenges, make deliberate decisions, and engage with others thoughtfully rather than reactively. Developing mindfulness begins with self-awareness, because you cannot observe or regulate what you do not first notice, which means paying attention to your thoughts, emotions, and bodily sensations, as well as the external context in which they arise, because every feeling of frustration, impatience, anger, or stress is a signal, a form of communication from your mind and body that requires recognition and conscious management. And by noticing these signals, you create the opportunity to pause, reflect, and choose a deliberate response, rather than reacting impulsively or habitually, which is the essence of emotional intelligence and thoughtful living. Positive self-talk amplifies the effectiveness of mindfulness, because the internal narrative you repeat shapes perception, emotional response, and behavior, and when you reinforce statements like, "I observe my thoughts without judgment," "I choose how I respond," "I am present in this moment," you strengthen the mental pathways that enable calm, deliberate, and emotionally intelligent responses, whereas self-critical, reactive, or negative thought patterns reinforce impulsivity, stress, and emotional instability because the mind tends to follow the narrative it is given, and repeated internal reinforcement shapes perception, focus, and habitual responses, which is why cultivating constructive self-talk in conjunction with mindfulness creates a powerful foundation for personal growth, emotional mastery, and intentional action. Mindfulness is particularly effective in managing stress and emotional reactivity because it allows you to observe the physiological and psychological signs of stress, frustration, or anger before they escalate, providing a space in which you can consciously choose a response that aligns with your values, goals, and long-term well-being, rather than being hijacked by automatic reactions, impulsive behavior, or unexamined emotions. And in this pause lies the transformative power of mindfulness, because it allows you to separate stimulus from response, perception from reaction, and observation from judgment, creating a mental framework in which thoughtful, intentional action becomes the default rather than an exception. Consider everyday situations where mindfulness can be applied: a heated conversation with a colleague, a personal conflict with a friend or family member, a stressful work deadline, or even a moment of internal anxiety or self-doubt. In each of these circumstances, the habitual reaction might be frustration, anger, avoidance, or impulsive response, but mindfulness allows you to pause, notice the arising thoughts and emotions, and ask yourself, what is happening within me right now? How can I respond thoughtfully? What action aligns with my values and long-term goals? And this simple yet powerful process shifts you from reactive patterns to deliberate, intentional behavior, reinforcing the neural pathways associated with self-control, composure, and effective decision-making, and gradually transforming the mind to default toward awareness, reflection, and intentionality in every situation. Practicing mindfulness also strengthens emotional intelligence because it encourages recognition and understanding of your own internal states, as well as the subtleties of others' behaviors, words, and emotions, allowing you to navigate relationships with empathy, clarity, and composure. Because when you are fully present, you are able to listen actively, observe carefully, and respond thoughtfully, rather than reacting impulsively based on assumptions, triggers, or unexamined emotions. And this awareness fosters stronger connections, constructive communication, and mutual respect, because the ability to remain present and deliberate reduces misunderstandings, emotional escalation, and reactive conflict, creating an environment in which both personal and interpersonal growth can flourish. Mindfulness is also closely linked to resilience, because the practice trains the mind to observe discomfort, adversity, or challenge without becoming overwhelmed, to notice thoughts and emotions as transient experiences rather than absolute truths, and to respond in a measured, intentional way that preserves composure, clarity, and effective action. And over time, this repeated practice builds the mental and emotional muscle necessary to navigate life's inevitable challenges with calm, confidence, and thoughtful strategy, because the mind trained in mindfulness becomes less reactive, more adaptive, and increasingly capable of managing stress, uncertainty, and complex situations without being hijacked by automatic impulses or emotional turbulence. The combination of mindfulness and positive self-talk reinforces deliberate, thoughtful action by providing both awareness and constructive internal guidance, because awareness alone allows you to notice patterns, emotions, and reactions, but self-talk provides the intentional reinforcement that strengthens adaptive responses, encourages constructive reflection, and fosters confidence in your ability to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. And over time, This integration of observation and intentional narrative becomes habitual, shaping behavior, decisions, and emotional regulation in ways that promote growth, calm, and resilience. Mindfulness also supports long-term personal growth and intentionality by creating a mental space in which reflection, learning, and deliberate planning are possible, because when you are fully present, you can evaluate past actions, recognize patterns, and make informed, intentional adjustments, and this process of continuous awareness, reflection, and deliberate choice accelerates the development of self-mastery, emotional intelligence, and effective decision-making, because each moment of mindful presence reinforces the skill of intentional engagement with life rather than reactive drift, creating cumulative benefits that shape the trajectory of your personal and professional life. Life will continually present distractions, pressures, emotional triggers, and challenges, and without mindfulness, it is easy to be swept along by reactive patterns, stress, and impulsive behavior, yet the consistent practice of observing, pausing, reflecting, and guiding your thoughts with positive self-talk ensures that you remain grounded, deliberate, and capable of responding in ways that support growth, composure, and resilience, and over time, this consistent engagement cultivates a habitual mindset in which presence, intentionality, and thoughtful response become the default, rather than the exception, creating a life in which clarity, emotional regulation, and personal mastery are consistently reinforced. Ultimately, mindfulness is not just a technique, but a way of living that enables you to inhabit each moment with awareness, choose responses deliberately, manage emotions constructively, and cultivate calm, clarity, and growth in every aspect of life. And when combined with reflection, positive self-talk, and deliberate practice, it becomes a transformative tool for emotional intelligence, resilience, and personal development, because the power to observe, understand, and intentionally respond shapes not only how you navigate challenges, relationships, and stress, but also the trajectory of your entire life, demonstrating that presence, awareness, and intentionality are the foundations of thoughtful, empowered, and growth-oriented living. Patience is more than the ability to wait, it is the conscious cultivation of calm, composure, and deliberate response in the face of delays, obstacles, challenges, or provocation, and it is a critical component of emotional intelligence, personal growth, and effective decision-making, because without patience, the mind is easily hijacked by frustration, impulsivity, and reactivity, leading to choices and behaviors that often undermine goals, relationships, and long-term well-being. Whereas practicing patience allows you to create the mental and emotional space needed to respond thoughtfully, assess situations objectively, and act in alignment with your values, priorities, and long-term objectives. And this ability to remain composed under pressure is one of the most powerful tools for personal empowerment, resilience, and success. Developing patience begins with awareness and self-reflection, because you cannot cultivate a quality you do not first recognize, which means observing the triggers, patterns, and circumstances that test your composure, whether in the form of interpersonal conflict, professional setbacks, personal disappointments, or internal pressures, and by noticing these moments, you create the opportunity to pause, reflect, and choose a measured, deliberate response rather than reacting impulsively, which is the foundation of both emotional intelligence and long-term personal growth, because every challenge or provocation is also an opportunity to strengthen resilience, self-control, and the habit of thoughtful engagement. And the more you practice patience, the more it becomes an instinctive response rather than a forced effort. Positive self-talk plays a central role in cultivating patience, because the internal dialogue we repeat shapes perception, emotional regulation, and behavior. And when you reinforce statements like, "I remain calm," "I respond thoughtfully," "I am in control of my emotions," or "I choose patience because it supports my long-term well-being," you strengthen the neural pathways that encourage composure, self-control, and resilience, whereas internal narratives rooted in frustration, urgency, or self-criticism exacerbate impatience, impulsive reactions, and stress, creating a feedback loop that undermines personal growth and emotional mastery. Because the mind naturally follows the script it is given, and repeated reinforcement of patient, deliberate thought patterns gradually reshapes habitual responses to stressful or challenging situations. Consider situations in everyday life that test patience: long lines, slow progress on a project, delayed responses from others, misunderstandings in relationships, or unexpected complications in personal or professional plans, and the natural instinct is often to react with frustration, irritation, or impulsive behavior. But by practicing patience, you create a mental pause between stimulus and response, allowing yourself to assess the situation objectively. Consider the consequences of possible reactions and choose a response that aligns with your values, supports your goals, and preserves composure. And over time, this deliberate practice strengthens resilience, improves decision-making, and reduces stress, because each instance of patient observation and thoughtful response reinforces the mental and emotional pathways that facilitate calm, intentional, and adaptive behavior. Patience also enhances relationships because it allows you to respond to others with empathy, understanding, and composure rather than reactive defensiveness, criticism, or judgment. And when you approach interactions with a patient mindset, you are better able to listen actively, communicate clearly, and navigate conflict constructively, creating stronger, more trusting, and cooperative relationships, because patience encourages the space needed to understand perspectives, acknowledge emotions, and act thoughtfully rather than impulsively, which fosters mutual respect, collaboration, and emotional stability in all areas of life. Furthermore, patience is deeply connected to resilience because the ability to maintain composure, focus, and deliberate action in the face of setbacks, delays, or adversity allows you to persevere through challenges without being overwhelmed by stress, frustration, or reactive impulses. And this resilience not only strengthens your capacity to achieve long-term goals, but also supports mental and emotional health, because habitual impatience and frustration consume energy, amplify stress responses, and limit the ability to think clearly, whereas cultivating patience conserves energy, enhances clarity, and fosters consistent, intentional, and effective action, even under pressure. The development of patience also requires consistent practice and reinforcement because the habitual responses of frustration, urgency, or impulsivity are deeply ingrained, and each instance of cultivating composure, observing triggers, and consciously choosing a measured response strengthens the mental and emotional habit of patience, gradually making deliberate calm the default mode, rather than an exception. And as this pattern becomes ingrained, you notice that challenges, delays, and obstacles no longer provoke the same stress, anxiety, or reactive behavior, but instead become opportunities to practice resilience, reflection, and thoughtful action, creating cumulative benefits that reinforce emotional intelligence, personal growth, and effective decision-making. Mindful observation is a key aspect of patience because it allows you to recognize thoughts, emotions, and bodily responses as they arise, without immediately reacting to them, which creates the space necessary for intentional decision-making, measured action, and emotional regulation, because awareness of internal states reduces the likelihood that impulses, frustration, or stress will drive behavior, and repeated practice of mindful patience strengthens the neural pathways associated with calm, deliberation, and thoughtful engagement, gradually transforming the way you navigate both routine and challenging situations. Positive self-talk and mental framing further reinforce the cultivation of patience, because the way you speak to yourself internally shapes emotional perception, resilience, and behavior. And affirmations such as, "I am calm, I can handle this, I respond thoughtfully, I am in control of my reactions," provide the reinforcement necessary to override habitual impatience and impulsivity, gradually embedding a patient mindset into your automatic response patterns, which over time reduces stress, improves clarity, enhances emotional intelligence, and supports long-term growth. Because patience is not merely a reactive avoidance of frustration, but an active, deliberate cultivation of composure, clarity, and thoughtful action that influences every aspect of life. Life will continually present situations that test patience, from minor inconveniences to major setbacks, interpersonal challenges to professional obstacles, and the consistent practice of observing, pausing, reflecting, and reinforcing calm through self-talk ensures that each challenge becomes an opportunity to strengthen resilience, self-control, and thoughtful response. And over time, this consistent engagement fosters a habitual mindset in which patience becomes the default mode of interaction, rather than a temporary or forced effort, creating a life in which composure, clarity, and deliberate decision-making define the way you respond to all experiences, both internally and externally. Ultimately, patience is not simply a virtue, it is a deliberate, practiced, and empowered approach to living that allows you to navigate life with calm, clarity, and intentionality, because it provides the mental and emotional space necessary to observe, reflect, and act thoughtfully rather than impulsively. And when combined with positive self-talk, mindfulness, and consistent practice, patience becomes a powerful tool for emotional mastery, personal growth, relationship building, and long-term success, demonstrating that the ability to wait, observe, and respond deliberately is not a passive act, but a dynamic, empowering skill that shapes every aspect of a resilient, thoughtful, and intentional life. Empathy is the ability to understand, feel, and relate to the emotions, perspectives, and experiences of others, and it is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence, meaningful relationships, and effective communication. Because without empathy, interactions become transactional, reactive, or self-centered, which often leads to misunderstandings, conflict, and emotional distance, whereas cultivating empathy allows you to connect deeply, respond thoughtfully, and navigate both personal and professional situations with compassion, insight, and emotional awareness, and over time, it becomes a transformative force that enhances not only relationships, but also resilience, personal growth, and the capacity for deliberate action. Developing empathy begins with active listening and conscious observation, because understanding another person's perspective requires noticing not only their words, but also their tone, body language, and underlying emotional state. And this level of attention cannot occur if the mind is distracted, judgmental, or reactive, because empathy is an intentional act of presence, requiring that you set aside assumptions, biases, and preconceptions to truly perceive the experience of another. And the more consistently you practice this attentive observation, the more naturally empathic responses become, forming a habitual pattern of thoughtful, compassionate engagement that strengthens both emotional intelligence and relational effectiveness. Positive self-talk enhances empathy because the internal narratives we hold influence how we interpret, respond to, and manage emotions, both our own and those of others. And when you reinforce statements such as, "I am capable of understanding others," "I respond with compassion," "I choose to listen and connect," you strengthen the mental and emotional pathways that support empathy, patience, and deliberate response, whereas negative or judgmental internal dialogue undermines the ability to connect, increasing reactive responses, defensiveness, or emotional distance, because the mind tends to follow the narratives it is given, and repeated reinforcement of thoughtful, compassionate internal dialogue gradually reshapes habitual patterns of perception and reaction. Empathy is particularly critical in moments of conflict, disagreement, or misunderstanding, because the natural instinct in these situations is often to react defensively, assert one's own perspective, or respond impulsively. Yet practicing empathy allows you to pause, observe, and consider the emotions, needs, and motivations of the other person, creating the mental space necessary to respond thoughtfully, de-escalate tension, and seek solutions that are constructive rather than reactive. And over time, this habitual practice not only improves communication, but also strengthens trust, mutual respect, and collaboration, because others recognize and respond positively to engagement that is grounded in understanding rather than reaction. Consider everyday scenarios in which empathy is tested: a friend expressing frustration or sadness, a colleague experiencing stress or pressure, a family member navigating a difficult situation, or even a stranger conveying anger, disappointment, or need. In each case, the instinct may be to respond quickly, offer unsolicited advice, or become defensive, but empathy invites you to pause, actively listen, and mentally step into the other person's perspective, asking, what are they feeling? Why do they feel this way? How can I respond in a way that acknowledges their experience while maintaining my composure? And this deliberate mental framing transforms interactions from reactive exchanges into meaningful connections, because the act of understanding and relating to another's experience promotes thoughtful, intentional, and emotionally intelligent responses. Practicing empathy also strengthens emotional regulation, because the ability to perceive, understand, and internalize the emotions of others without becoming overwhelmed requires that you remain aware of your own internal state, set mental boundaries, and consciously manage reactive impulses. And this practice cultivates resilience, composure, and thoughtful decision-making, because you learn to navigate complex emotional landscapes without being hijacked by stress, frustration, or reactive tendencies, and you gain the capacity to respond to challenges, conflicts, and emotionally charged situations with clarity, patience, and insight, rather than impulsivity or defensiveness. Mindful observation and reflection are key components of empathy, because they allow you to notice subtle cues, patterns, and emotional dynamics that might otherwise be overlooked. And by regularly reflecting on interactions, emotions, and responses, you enhance your ability to recognize, interpret, and respond appropriately to the needs, feelings, and perspectives of others. And over time, this repeated practice reinforces neural pathways associated with thoughtful, deliberate, and compassionate engagement, making empathic responses increasingly intuitive and natural, even in challenging circumstances. Empathy is closely linked to effective communication, because understanding the emotional and psychological state of another person allows you to frame responses in ways that are considerate, constructive, and aligned with their perspective, which reduces misunderstanding, de-escalates tension, and promotes collaboration, trust, and mutual respect. And when combined with deliberate self-talk and reflection, it ensures that communication remains grounded in emotional awareness, intentionality, and clarity, rather than impulsive reaction, judgment, or misinterpretation. Developing empathy also fosters personal growth, because it encourages self-awareness, humility, and perspective-taking, reminding you that every individual has unique experiences, motivations, and challenges, and by consistently practicing empathy, you broaden your understanding of human behavior, expand your emotional intelligence, and strengthen the capacity to engage with life thoughtfully, intentionally, and compassionately, which in turn enhances resilience, decision-making, and the ability to respond to challenges without being consumed by reactive emotional patterns. Life will continually present opportunities to practice empathy through interactions with friends, family, colleagues, clients, or even strangers, and without deliberate attention and consistent practice, it is easy to default to self-centered, reactive, or judgmental patterns. Yet by intentionally observing, listening, reflecting, and reinforcing positive self-talk that encourages understanding, compassion, and connection, you create a mental and emotional habit in which empathic engagement becomes instinctive, and over time, this consistency enhances not only relationships, but also emotional mastery, personal resilience and the ability to respond thoughtfully and effectively in all situations. Ultimately, empathy is not merely an emotional skill or interpersonal tool. It is a conscious, deliberate, and empowering approach to navigating life, relationships, and challenges, because it allows you to perceive, understand, and respond to the experiences of others with awareness, composure, and intentionality, and when combined with self-reflection, mindfulness, and constructive self-talk, empathy becomes a transformative mechanism that strengthens emotional intelligence, relational depth, and personal growth, demonstrating that the ability to understand and connect with others thoughtfully is not only a hallmark of emotional mastery, but also a pathway to meaningful, resilient, and empowered living. The power of perspective is one of the most transformative tools you can cultivate in life, because the way you interpret events, challenges, and interactions fundamentally shapes your emotions, reactions, and outcomes, and yet so often people allow circumstances, the actions of others, or fleeting frustrations to dictate their internal state, resulting in stress, reactive behavior, and missed opportunities for growth, whereas deliberately cultivating perspective enables you to observe situations with clarity, assess them objectively, and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, creating a profound sense of control over your emotional world and fostering resilience, composure, and intentional decision-making, because perspective allows you to step back from the immediacy of circumstance and evaluate both short-term reactions and long-term implications before choosing how to engage. Developing perspective begins with awareness, because you cannot shift how you see the world if you are unaware of your habitual patterns of thought, judgment, or reaction, and this requires observing your immediate emotional responses to stress, criticism, disappointment, or conflict, noticing when you are inclined to assign blame, exaggerate negative outcomes, or fixate on perceived injustices, and by recognizing these patterns, you create the space to consciously reinterpret situations, consider alternative viewpoints, and choose a response that aligns with your values, goals, and long-term well-being, rather than being hijacked by automatic, reactive thought processes that often escalate frustration, resentment, or anxiety. Positive self-talk is a critical component of perspective because the narratives we repeat to ourselves shape both perception and emotional response. And when you intentionally reinforce statements such as, "I choose to see this clearly," "I control my perspective," "I focus on what I can influence," you strengthen the mental pathways that support calm, deliberate, and constructive thinking, whereas allowing negative, judgmental, or defeatist internal dialogue to dominate reinforces a reactive mindset, amplifying stress, frustration, and impulsive responses because the mind naturally follows the story it is told, and repeated reinforcement of empowering, perspective-oriented narratives gradually reshapes habitual interpretations, emotional reactions, and behavior. Perspective is particularly valuable in moments of conflict, disappointment, or challenge, because these are the times when reactive thinking is most likely to hijack judgment, escalate emotions, and trigger impulsive decisions, and yet the act of stepping back, observing the situation objectively, and considering broader contexts, potential consequences, and alternative viewpoints transforms these moments from sources of reactive stress into opportunities for growth, insight, and deliberate action, because the clarity that comes from perspective allows you to choose responses that are aligned with long-term goals, personal values, and constructive outcomes rather than being dictated by immediate emotion, perceived injustice, or external pressure. Consider everyday scenarios that test perspective: a misunderstanding with a colleague, a delayed project, an unexpected personal setback, criticism from a friend or family member, or external circumstances beyond your control. In each case, the natural tendency may be to focus on frustration, blame, or negativity. Yet by consciously shifting your mental lens to consider alternative interpretations, broader context, and potential lessons or opportunities. You gain control over your emotional response, reduce stress, and enable thoughtful, deliberate, and productive action, because perspective transforms adversity into insight, challenge into opportunity, and conflict into understanding, reinforcing both resilience and emotional intelligence. Practicing perspective also strengthens emotional regulation, because it reduces the likelihood that impulsive, reactive, or emotionally charged responses will dominate behavior, allowing space for measured thought, reflection, and deliberate choice. And over time, this repeated practice creates a neural habit in which calm, deliberate, and constructive responses become the default, rather than the exception, because each instance of choosing perspective reinforces composure, clarity, and thoughtful engagement, which in turn enhances personal growth, decision-making, and relationship quality, because others respond positively to individuals who consistently demonstrate emotional balance, insight, and constructive problem-solving, even in challenging situations. Mindful observation is key to developing perspective, because the ability to step outside immediate reactions and observe thoughts, feelings, and external circumstances without judgment provides the cognitive and emotional space necessary for thoughtful evaluation, reframing, and deliberate action. And by integrating mindfulness with conscious reflection and self-talk, you cultivate the capacity to notice automatic judgments, identify distortions in perception, and intentionally reinterpret experiences in ways that support clarity, resilience, and intentionality, creating cumulative benefits for both mental and emotional well-being, as well as for interpersonal interactions. Perspective is also deeply intertwined with resilience, because the ability to reframe challenges, setbacks, and frustrations allows you to approach difficulties with composure, adaptability, and long-term focus, rather than being consumed by short-term irritation, blame, or defeat. And the repeated practice of shifting perspective in challenging circumstances strengthens the mind's capacity to handle adversity, maintain emotional equilibrium, and make intentional, value-driven choices, because resilience is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to navigate it thoughtfully and effectively, which perspective enables. The combination of positive self-talk, mindful awareness, and deliberate reframing creates a robust mental framework for perspective, because awareness allows observation of reactive tendencies, self-talk reinforces constructive interpretation, and deliberate reframing provides actionable cognitive tools to shift meaning, assign priorities, and evaluate consequences, resulting in a mindset that defaults to clarity, thoughtful engagement, and intentional action rather than stress, reactive thinking, or impulsivity. Life will continually present situations that challenge your perspective, from minor irritations to major crises, interpersonal conflicts to professional setbacks. And without deliberate attention and practice, it is easy to fall into reactive thought patterns, negativity, or frustration. Yet by consistently applying mindfulness, reflection, and perspective-oriented self-talk, you cultivate a mental habit in which calm, deliberate, and constructive evaluation of circumstances becomes second nature. And over time, this habitual practice not only reduces stress and emotional volatility, but also enhances decision-making, problem-solving, and the ability to engage with others thoughtfully and effectively, because perspective transforms reaction into reflection, chaos into clarity, and challenge into opportunity. Ultimately, perspective is a dynamic, deliberate, and empowering approach to living, because it allows you to control how you interpret events, manage emotions, and respond to challenges, creating a life in which intentionality, clarity, and emotional mastery are the default, rather than exceptions. And when combined with positive self-talk, mindfulness, and deliberate practice, perspective becomes a transformative force that shapes both internal experiences and external outcomes, demonstrating that the ability to see clearly, respond thoughtfully, and interpret life constructively is one of the most powerful tools for resilience, personal growth, and emotionally intelligent, empowered living, proving that your perspective is not simply a lens, but a tool for shaping the trajectory of your entire life.